to the cloud. All mics are muted. Unless you're actually called on to say something, please keep them that way. We don't need sounds of barking dogs or flushing toilets, all that good stuff. Most questions will be answered at the end. If you put your question in chat, then you don't have to worry about forgetting it. You can put it in as soon as you think of it, and it'll still be there at the end. Typically, what we'll do as well is at the end, if people want to stick a hand up, then we'll call on you. Again, we're all volunteers. I don't do this professionally, so try and be patient with me. So the Canoe Club is part of the RA Center. RA Center is in Ottawa on Riverside Drive, in between Bank Street and Bronson. And if you look over here, here's Brewers Park, and there's Carleton University. Our Canoe Club itself works out of that blue building there. The RA Center has a whole bunch of stuff going on. If you look at the club part alone, there's a wide variety of them, anywhere from archery to pickleball, largest pickleball thing in town. They've got a really revamped curling rink, largest gun club in town, and a lot of other things. Personally, I think they also have the best canoe club in town. The mission, vision, value are exactly what you would expect. Some examples of the sports. Badminton, they've actually sent people to the Can-Am Games and had medals. We got judo, as noted, the largest pickleball in town. Not all sports, by the way. Chess, photography, that sort of thing goes on. They have a lot of summer camps, and one advantage to having all these different sports going on is, as part of your summer camp, you can get a certified archery instructor for some of the classes. The Canoe Club itself, we've been around since 1952. Originally, we were created at the YMYWCA, moved over to the RA in 2012. The club itself, the RA provides us all our administrative support, but all of the trip planning and other stuff is all run and organized by volunteers. So, for example, if you see a trip going out to Lake Whatchamacallit, the reason it's going there is because somebody said, I want to go to Lake Whatchamacallit, and put it up on the calendar, and a whole bunch of people join in. Our program includes day, weekend, and longer trips, flatwater, whitewater, family programs, training anywhere from I've never been in a canoe in my life to advanced solo whitewater canoeing. There's also level 1 kayak training. And no, this picture in the middle here is not a recommended procedure. The club has most of the group gear you would need, including kayaks and canoes for rental, but they're for rental on club trips only. Other equipment that's available for use on club trips are, the PFDs, paddles, bailers, all of the stuff that you need for the group gear. Personal gear is not provided, and in all honesty, I wouldn't sleep in somebody else's sleeping bag anyway. The canoe and kayak rentals range between $15 and $25 a day. $25 a day to rent a tandem whitewater canoe, and that 25 is split between 2 people. So if you're looking for economical canoe tripping and recreational canoeing, we're the ones there. So on to tonight's show. Kate Prince is a project manager of the Wabakimi Boreal Caribou Citizen Monitoring Project, combining her passion for conservation, community involvement, and paddling in wild places. So she's taken this opportunity to share her experience and love of citizen science to serve a really good purpose and get on with the idea of environmental stewardship. So with that, Kate, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. I'm just going to share my slides here. And as Mark said, thank you for your patience if we have technical issues. The slides weren't working perfectly earlier, so we'll hope that things look a little bit better as we go. One second here, I'm almost there. Okay, so actually maybe Mark, can I just check with you? Are you seeing my all my notes as well, or just the slide?
We're seeing the presentation view, not the slide view.
Okay.
That's the one.
For some reason it keeps flipping back. Okay, here we go. So thanks very much, Mark, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. As Mark said, I'm the project manager for the Friends of Wabakimi's Caribou Monitoring Project. I split my time between Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, where I am now, and Wakefield, Quebec, where I've lived for the last almost 15 years. I've been a wood canvas canoe builder during that time in Wakefield, and I'm one of the owners of Headwaters Canoes. I'm a lifelong paddler, and so I've gotten to know a little bit of the few people in the Ottawa Valley paddling crowd, and it's nice to see a couple of familiar names in the crowd tonight. So thanks for joining us. Before I dive in, I want to acknowledge that the Wabakimi area where the project is taking place is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe peoples. The areas within the territories of Treaty 3, Treaty 9, and the Robinson Superior Treaty. And as an organization, Friends of Wabakimi and myself, we acknowledge that the relationships that those local communities that are present there now and historically have with their ancestral lands is a very important and ancient relationship. And with Caribou, those people are the original stewards of biodiversity. So we're going to cover a lot of territory in the next 45 minutes or so. I want to just give you a brief background on Wabakimi itself and background on Caribou, their adaptations in the Boreal forest, why we're doing this work, what the project is all about, and then I'll fill you in on how you might be involved if that's something you're interested in the future. Friends of Wabakimi is a nonprofit that advocates for the natural, cultural, and historical resources of the Wabakimi area. The organization evolved from the Wabakimi Project, which was a massive undertaking that was led by Phil Cotton to map canoe routes and open up historical portages in the Wabakimi area. So that took place for about 14 years, and then the Friends of Wabakimi was born out of that to continue sharing the recreational values of the area with paddlers, and also with a slightly broader mandate that also does include conservation projects such as this one. FOW also collaborates with Ontario Parks to clean up problem areas in the park, and does fund additional canoe rangers to continue the trail maintenance that the park does and kind of expand on that on canoe routes within the park. So for those of you not familiar with the area, let's start with a map. So of course, Here we are, here you are, most of you likely, at least some of you in Ottawa, in Eastern Ontario, and up there on the north shore of Lake Superior is Thunder Bay. The blue place marker north of Thunder Bay indicates Wabakimi Provincial Park, roughly 240 kilometers north of Thunder Bay, Ontario. So if you were to hop in your car now, it would take you about 18-20 hours. You'd arrive right here in the village of Armstrong, which acts sort of as a gateway to Wabakimi, to the whole Wabakimi area. Wabakimi Provincial Park is the second largest park in Ontario after Polar Bear Provincial Park. The park itself is 892,000 hectares at the core of a much broader wilderness area. So you can see that kind of faint green outline there in the middle. That's the park. And the full Wabakimi area, as the Friends of Wabakimi refers to it, includes Crown land and other parks and conservation reserves outside of that park itself. So you can think of it in the same way that if you're familiar with Temagami, there is a provincial park there in the area, but in terms of paddling and the wilderness area, it's a combination of different protected areas and Crown land, and of course, the water moves in and out of those areas. So in terms of a paddling area, it's a much larger area than just the park itself. The full area is 25,000 square kilometers in size. That's about 3.5 times bigger than Algonquin Park. You could fit Prince Edward Island in there 5 times. It's just a massive wilderness area. The park itself contains about 10,000 lakes, of course, far more in the surrounding areas. Many well-traveled rivers that some of you have probably paddled, like the Albany. And from a paddling standpoint, you're looking at world-class canoeing, more than 2,000 kilometers of established canoe routes. And then the piece that makes it so special for most paddlers is that it's not uncommon to go on a multi-week trip and see 1 or 2 or maybe no other paddlers while you're out there. There's only about 700 paddlers who visit Wabakimi Provincial Park every year. And then, of course, from my perspective, a pretty special bonus, there's a chance that you'll see caribou while you're there. In terms of access to the park, the only main road to get you to the area is the highway to Armstrong. However, that doesn't lead you right to the park itself. From the town of Armstrong, many folks will use the local outfitter to get a vehicle shuttle to a nearby put-in, often on logging roads, but it's also fairly common to access more remote areas of the park in the region by float plane from Armstrong, or there are access, again, float plane outfitters on the west side of the park. Or many excellent routes are accessible by train stop, where the Via line runs across the southern edge of the park. So you can put your canoe on the train with you either in Armstrong, if you drove that far, or at a more southerly point, like in Sudbury or Toronto, and hop off at a mile marker right at the lake where you want to be, right within the park. So the Caribou project is targeting lakes within the Crown land areas, mostly outside of the park, and within this kind of pink horseshoe, so to the west, south, and southeast of Wabakimi Provincial Park. So I want to go back a step just to caribou. What are boreal caribou? When you think of caribou, I think many people picture the big herds of migratory caribou in the far north and the territories and in Alaska, like the porcupine caribou herd, or in northern Quebec, we've got the George River herd. Some of you have likely been fortunate enough to actually encounter some of these caribou on canoe trips. But what exactly are boreal caribou? So to start with the basics, caribou are a medium-sized ungulate, a member of the deer family that are found throughout the circumpolar north. So when you think of reindeer in Northern Europe and Russia, these are all actually the same species as the caribou that we have. The subspecies that we're looking at is woodland caribou, Rangifer tarandus caribou, which are located within that green range on the map, nearly from coast to coast in Canada. And then an even further distinction, which brings us to the boreal caribou that we're focused on, is the ecotype breakdown. So in Northern Ontario, the non-migratory forest-dwelling caribou are within that central band, that darker gray area in Northern Ontario. And these are the boreal caribou. So they really are quite an amazing species. They're highly specialized for life in the boreal forest. They have a whole bunch of pretty fabulous adaptations. They thrive on a diet primarily of lichen, both summer and winter. This stuff here, Cladonia lichen. Amazingly, they can smell lichen through up to a meter of snow, which is a great skill to have, that they need to eat about 3 kilograms of it and other plants every day. They have hollow hair. The image on the right is a scan of a caribou hair using an electron microscope. And you can see there all of those air pockets within the hair. They're one of the best swimmers amongst the mammals living in the boreal forest. They truly are perfectly adapted for all of the lakes and rivers in Northern Ontario, because this air helps them to float high, like it's kind of like they're wearing their own personal built-in PFD, and their big hooves help to propel them in the water. The hollow hair traps air, of course, both within the individual hair, but also within their fur coat, like a down jacket does, and creates exceptional insulation for cold winter climates. That top left photo shows a clump of hair in the moss where a caribou has been laying down. They have the widest and roundest hooves of all of the deer family. So they truly are adapted for walking on soft ground with these big snowshoes on, like walking on ground like peatlands or in deep snow. And their hooves get a sharp edge around the outside in the winter, which essentially gives them a tool for digging in the snow for lichen. They're the only ungulate species where both the male and female grow antlers, which is gives the pregnant females an advantage to protect their food sources in the winter, to really give them a leg up when they're pregnant. But boreal caribou are a species at risk, both in Ontario and across the country. The Friends of Wabakimi Monitoring Project is kind of a unique research project that combines canoeing in some of the best of Northern Ontario's remote wilderness with citizen science. So it's an opportunity for paddlers to give a little bit of their time and energy while on a canoe trip to a project and a cause it's focused on preserving the biodiversity of those wild spaces that we all treasure. And so what we're doing is surveying for evidence of caribou, gathering data that's then contributing to the conservation and protection of the species in the future. So what does the project involve? Well, it's a 3-year project. We're heading into the 2nd year this summer to survey for caribou calving sites and just generally document evidence of caribou in the Wabakimi area. The project is funded by the Caribou Conservation Stewardship Program, a program of the Ontario government that is part of a 5-year agreement with the federal government to take action on caribou conservation in the province of Ontario. So there's several main goals of the project. The first is education. We're sharing the story of caribou in Ontario, the threats that they face. We're building interest and awareness of caribou conservation and the power of citizen science to make a difference. We're empowering and training wilderness paddlers to gather evidence of boreal caribou present in the area. So what does that actually mean? That means recruiting volunteers to go on canoe trips and search for and document evidence of caribou. So you don't have to be a scientist or a field tech or have biology background, this is a place where a skilled wilderness paddler can contribute to important data collection. And then finally, the data that we collect is submitted to policymakers and made available to conservation professionals to inform and guide caribou recovery efforts. So it's helping to build an up-to-date database where there's a lack of information right now of critical caribou habitat that can be used to advocate for habitat protections in the future. So before I dive more into the project itself, the big question is why caribou and what makes them so in need of this effort? Well, Boreal caribou are listed as threatened, as I mentioned, both federally since 2003 and provincially since 2008, when the Species at Risk Act took effect. Threatened status means that the population numbers have decreased to a size that they will continue to decline until some action is taken to reduce the threats to the population. So currently, the population of caribou across Ontario as a whole is estimated to be about 5,000. And within the Wabakimi area, within the park, I should say, the population is estimated at closer to about 300 animals. This population is half of what it was 120 years ago. They've lost 40 to 50% of their habitat in Ontario since the late 1800s. I'm sure many of you, most of you likely have paddled in Algonquin. So I want you to picture yourself going on a canoe trip in Algonquin roughly 100 years ago. You very well, at that time, could have encountered caribou swimming across Opeongo Lake, maybe found evidence of their calving beds on the islands on Big Trout Lake, say, in the States. At that time, their range extended into Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota. There were even records in Vermont and New York. So today, the most significant threat to the caribou population in the Wabakimi area specifically continues to be habitat fragmentation and disturbance, mainly due to resource extraction. So logging, mining, road building for those same purposes. And on top of that, there is increased predation, which is caused as a result of that changing habitat. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Caribou require large tracts of mature boreal forest to support even their very low density population. The large tracts of forest allow the caribou to disperse across their range successfully, even when conditions are unfavorable, such as when they encounter some sort of disturbance that could be caused by natural means like fire. You can see the evidence of fire in this portage picture in Wabakimi, or human disturbance like forestry or mining activity. So you can see the logging scars in the lower left photo. These remain for many, many years, even decades after logging activity has actually taken place. And so that really impacts the caribou habitat. Having large tracts of forest allows caribou to spread out to avoid predators and move to appropriate habitat during different times of year. For example, during calving season, they'll seek out different habitat than they look for in the winter. In terms of predation, caribou become more vulnerable to predators when they share their habitat with other prey animals like moose that tend to attract those predators. Moose thrive in younger regenerating forest, but caribou really need that intact and mature forest. So you can picture the situation where forestry occurs in caribou habitat, in mature forest, trees are cut down, the area begins to regenerate, which means it attracts more moose that will move into the area, followed by wolves. And then that creates a situation where there's a greater chance of encounters between caribou and wolves within that changing habitat. Caribou are able to withstand a certain level of disturbance within their range. Scientists have determined that there's an important disturbance threshold. That number is 35%. So if less than 35% of the habitat is disturbed by any means, whether that's natural or human caused, then caribou still have enough habitat to have a reasonable chance of maintaining their population. However, at this point in time, few of Ontario's caribou ranges are considered self-sustaining, meaning that the populations are likely to continue to decline because the habitat just isn't adequate for them anymore. So unfortunately, the two areas where our data collection is taking place, they're called the Bright Sand Range and the Nipigon Range, are both assessed to have disturbance levels close to 40%. So this map is a map of the Bright Sand Range. That's the more sort of westerly part of the Wabakimi area. Wabakimi Park is located mostly within the northern part of the range. And does extend into to the east a little bit more as well, but it's mostly within the area that has the white background at the north there. The light blue areas on this map are areas of human-made disturbance, and the red is natural disturbance. So that gives a pretty clear visual just by glancing at that of all of the disturbed habitat that the caribou are facing. And when you think of the protected area being the park towards the north, you can see how they're under pretty significant pressure as the caribou begin to venture outside of the park itself. And then finally, another reason to protect caribou is caribou are described as an umbrella species, meaning that protecting them results in overall improved health of the entire boreal forest ecosystem. These are a few of the bird species at risk that breed in the boreal forest. We've got Canada warblers, common nighthawk, olive-sided flycatcher, evening grosbeak that you might be so lucky as to see at a feeder if you feed winter birds, some years at least, rusty blackbirds, and of course, the elusive gulo, the wolverine. So protecting caribou habitat means leaving intact and healthy ecosystems for all of these species as well. And of course, the benefits go beyond species at risk, as pointed out in the quote from Environment and Climate Change Canada. It also means limiting climate impacts by keeping the massive carbon sinks intact in the boreal ecosystem. And I'll point out a little bit selfishly that what's good for caribou is also good for paddlers. It's the thing that brings us into contact with caribou occasionally, if we're lucky, which is large tracts of undisturbed wilderness and the healthy ecosystems and wildlife that come along with that. So as this is the second year of the project we're getting into, I'm going to give you a very brief summary of what we've accomplished in our startup test year last year. If you're interested in diving deeper into the details, please check out the Friends of Wabakimi website for the year one results report and the results webinar that are posted there. So in 2024, we conducted 3 survey trips, which surveyed 3 different target lakes. 13 people participated, and in total, 82 surveys were conducted. Our teams last year found evidence of caribou at 21 survey points, so about just over a quarter of the points surveyed. This graph shows the number of sites where evidence was found, not the quantity of that evidence itself. The most common evidence was pellets or scat found at 2/3 of the sites that had evidence. There were 5 sites where surveyors found more than one type of evidence. So, for example, a bedding area that also included pellets or tracks. And surveyors observed tracks at 8 sites most excitingly, of course, there were 2 sites where there were actually 3 individual caribou that were spotted. And so that brings us to the second year of the project. So this summer, we plan to conduct at least 8 survey trips with up to 36 volunteers. We'll be focusing on a new set of target lake areas that will be located outside of the park on Crown land. And again, accessed mostly from the Armstrong area, Armstrong, the east side of the park. And we'll continue to promote the use of iNaturalist for paddlers not involved in our trips, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later on. So I want to share a little video with you. These are the voices of some of our volunteers from last summer sharing their experience taking part in survey trips. And if you haven't been to Wabakimi, it just gives you a few scenes from the area, what it sort of looks like in that area. So I'm gonna share this, and we'll hope for the best that it's gonna work here.
There's something very special about this place, and it really does almost draw you to come back and spend longer.
Myriad waterway routes in the Boreal forest, very wild, an area larger than Quetico and the Boundary Waters put together, that sees only a small fraction of the amount of visitors that those areas do.
I just thought, I can contribute to this. Let's go.
People always ask me, well, why do you do that? It's hard work and stuff like that. And, you know, it's just, there's something satisfying about it. And the things that you see, the beauty that's out there. And it's a challenge. You know, there's no doubt that that's part of it too.
That whole learning process of putting the training into action was just really personally satisfying.
I think it's really nice to connect with other people who care about these things, right? And who like going out canoeing as well.
To be able to be out there and experiencing that together with others who have a very similar or interest and passion for that, not only the project, but just that experience and being out there, those are moments that really stay with you.
I've always, you know, explored different places. This weird had a purpose. Do get into the bush a little bit and wander around. You know, if you pay attention, you know, there's things out there. But yeah, you gotta sometimes get off the trail a little bit.
There's something about just being in the habitat, the territory of these creatures, somewhere where a caribou had her calf, like, you know, that's pretty cool just to imagine them actually there.
Ray and I, bushwhacking.
We did find evidence in a couple different spots. It was like, okay, I can see this perfect. It was more open and mossy, and the lichens were everywhere. You learn, and you think outside the box a little bit. So
You learned how to really look more closely at the terrain to me, it's always a joy to start to see new things. It was an unusual amount of delight to find scat.
The black flies, the mosquitoes, the challenges of the actual groundwork, and camping, dealing with rain, storms, wind, all those things.
You could not only feel like there was something very practical and tangible and a purpose of the trip, you could become more immersed in the whole boreal forest wilderness.
I love seeing new areas, new lakes, new routes that I haven't been on. And in this case, of course, it's caribou habitat.
To experience and witness a caribou for the very first time in our lives, the excitement, the fumbling around and try to figure out how to zoom in and all of this. They're just swimming, motoring across the front of us.
If you want something different and want to feel like you're helping, there's no doubt that this is worth it for me.
So hopefully, if you haven't paddled in Wabakimi, hopefully that gives you a sense of a little bit about what the area looks like. Of course, the main focus of the survey trips is to search for and document evidence of caribou, and with a particular focus on calving beds. So the trips take place in July and August to avoid disturbing cow and calf caribou on their bedding areas at a time when the calves are most sensitive in those first few weeks of their lives in the spring. Teams of 4 to 6 people are given a target lake, and then though that team themselves takes on the planning of the canoe trip, how they'll access the area and those logistics. The survey sites are chosen based on habitat characteristics and geographic locations that are caribou's preferred habitat. So for calving purposes, they seek out an isolated area, which would be islands, peninsulas, and we also survey beaches. And then lastly, volunteers will receive training to carry out the surveys, following a standardized protocol and then recording that information on a standard data sheet. So the survey protocol is very straightforward, just takes some basic training. To conduct a survey, surveyors begin by paddling around an island or along the shore of a peninsula in order to find a suitable landing that provides easy access for caribou, such as a beach or a low, unobstructed path. And that's usually also a reasonable place to land a canoe. And then the search begins. So once on land, the surveyors will document their location using a GPS and then head off to walk either around the island or sort of around the perimeter of the peninsula and look for evidence of caribou. So what exactly are we looking for? Well, it's not the most glamorous of the findings, really, but pellets or scat is the most abundant type of evidence that we find and likely will find. In the first season of surveys last year, 2/3 of the sites with evidence of caribou had pellets, and they can really, truly give us a lot of information. You can see the ruler in the top left photo. Using the size of the pellets, we can determine if they're from an adult, a yearling, or a calf caribou. We can also determine how old the pellets are just by looking at how wet or dry they are, whether they're decomposing, whether they're sort of buried in the moss or not. And this really helps to say whether the caribou has used the site recently or not. Another piece of evidence that we look for is bedding areas, or areas where caribou has spent time laying down or sleeping, spending the night. Even calving beds where the cow caribou has given birth to a calf. One of the goals of the project is to identify calving beds where possible. And the reason for that is that caribou will return to the same location year after year to give birth. They only have one calf a year, unlike deer or moose that are more likely to have twins. And so if a caribou finds a safe calving area in their preferred habitat with lots of forage, they very well will likely return for many, many years. And so protecting these locations is important to help protect the population. The bedding areas often have other evidence as well. Pellets, evidence of lichen forage, caribou hair, as you can see in the lower two photos, tracks, game trails, all of which sort of tell the story and give a sense of how well used that area was. Perhaps even the female shed antler, which is a sign that she gave birth at that location. A little bit of behavior. After the female caribou gives birth, the first task for that newborn calf is to gain enough strength to move around, of course, and to learn how to swim. So within a week or 10 days, the cow and calf are typically mobile enough and are actually able to swim between islands or from mainland to island, which provides much greater safety for that young calf. So a cow and calf will use multiple sites within a relatively small geographic area as that calf grows in the first months over the summer. So I'm going to show you just a little video of a bedding area that gives you a sense of a bit more about what a survey looks like and also what a bedding area looks like. Here we've got a bed where a caribou has laid down. You can see it's packed down, trampled down there, and there's some traces of fur left behind.
The other thing we get at this site here is a nice view of the water. So if the mama caribou is surveying its surroundings, it's got a nice view of everything coming here from the water side.
So here we have adult winter pellets. They're sort of worked into the moss and lichen, partially covered by leaves, and they're quite dry. You may have noticed in those photos or in the video earlier that the bedding areas, those more upland areas, the ground's typically covered in mosses and lichens. So detecting tracks can be very difficult. Certainly identifying them as caribou and not moose tracks can be very, very challenging in those sorts of conditions. Tracks are most often visible on beaches, both because the caribou like the beaches, it's easy for them to move in and out of the water there, and because they're easier to identify in wet sand than in other substrates. So this is a priority stop for our surveys as well. We're also looking for antlers. As I mentioned, the female antler is shed right after giving birth. And this is due to a hormonal change. So finding the female antler at a bedding area indicates that that's the place that the caribou likely calved. One compelling example of how deeply caribou are intertwined with their habitat is the growth of their habitat, and sort of the seasons is the growth of their antlers. Male caribou begin growing their antlers in March, growing very quickly from May to July, and are completely hardened off by September. And then after the rut in November, when they no longer need to have their antlers to show off or compete for mates during mating season, the males will shed their antlers and spend the winter without. Female caribou develop smaller antlers from June to September, and pregnant females will keep the antlers throughout the winter and use them to defend food sources that are critical to them during pregnancy. And then, of course, the pregnant female will lose her antlers within days after calving. So we are looking for antler sheds at bedding areas. Females who are not pregnant will lose their antlers earlier in the winter, and that, of course, as I mentioned, means that the only caribou with antlers through the bulk of the winter and spring months are the pregnant females, and so they do have this advantage over other caribou to defend their food sources that they need to calve successfully. We didn't find any antlers last summer, but it's something we'll continue to look for this year. And then, of course, what we're all hoping for is to be lucky enough to actually spot some caribou out there. So the data that we collect from our survey trips is submitted annually to Ontario's Natural Heritage Information Centre, the NHIC. This is the branch of the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources that's responsible for maintaining a provincial record of species at risk. The NHIC shares information in the database to support conservation efforts and also forest management decision-making across Ontario. And then the other place that our data goes is it will be available to conservation professionals to help guide and inform the protection of boreal caribou. It allows the Friends of Wabakimi to make informed comments. FOW does participate in the forest management planning process in the nearby managed forests around the Armstrong area. So it gives data where there hasn't been a lot of recent data to contribute to that forest management planning process in the area. You don't have to be on one of our survey trips for your caribou sighting to make a difference if you're in the Wabakimi area. If you're a paddler and you've spent time in the area or you're planning to paddle there in the future, make sure you report any caribou observations using iNaturalist. iNaturalist is a hugely valuable tool to collect species observation data that can be used by researchers. It's a community science tool that anyone can contribute to, and for us, for our project, it allows for far more wilderness canoeists to collect data from a wider geographic area than we could ever cover on our survey trips. There's lots of folks out there paddling, of course, may encounter evidence of caribou, and these are all useful observations to record. Any observation should be submitted to two projects, both the Wabakimi Boreal Caribou Citizen Monitoring Project and the NHIC's Rare Species of Ontario project. to make sure that it gets into the official provincial records. These are a few of the observations that have been made so far and submitted to our project. So we've got live animals that have been seen, scat, tracks, all of which contribute to a greater body of knowledge about where caribou are using important habitat spaces. If you're not familiar with iNaturalist already, I would highly encourage you to make an account, add the app to your phone. It's really easy to start by just making a few observations around your house or around town, around the city, or in Gatineau Park, or wherever you happen to be out. You don't have to be going to Wabakimi. You don't have to know what you're looking at in order to make an observation. And it doesn't need to be a rare species to be a valuable observation. So I would encourage anyone and everyone to try using iNaturalist. It's something that we can all contribute to. As is the case with many conservation issues, caribou conservation is not only about having the right data to guide decision making, it's also heavily affected by policy. There's a lot of organizations, many organizations in both Canada and in the United States that are working for caribou conservation by tackling different dimensions of the issue through research and education and policy work. And I'd strongly encourage you to look up these organizations and learn more about what they're doing, find out how you can be involved or support the work that they're doing as well. The Friends of Wabakimi website is up there at the top. Please have a look, or you can get in touch with me if you have any questions, that email address or through the website. And at this point in time, we have filled most of the spots for our 2025 survey trips. However, we may still be looking for a couple more people. So if it's something you're interested in, I would encourage you to reach out and I could chat with you about what might be available. We will also have a full suite of as many trips going out next year. So please keep us in mind if it's something that is sort of piques your interest at all. And I'm going to turn it over for questions shortly, but I just want to let you know that FOW will be at a few shows in the coming months, including the Ottawa Outdoor and Adventure Travel Show in Nepean in late April. It's free admission, free parking. So if you're in the area, please drop in and come say hello. FOW will be there. I'll be there talking about the Caribou project, but there'll also be other FOW folks around with maps for sale. We're just happy to talk about paddling and canoe trips. So come on over and say hello if you're in the area. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and maybe I'll stop sharing and just check in and see if we've got any questions.
So the canoe club is actually going to be at the outdoor show in Ottawa as well.
Great.
So if you happen to drop by and want to have us direct people your way, I will be at the booth, and I'd be more than happy to do that.
That would be great. I'll definitely come by and make sure to say hello, and we can connect then.
The other thing that was at the outdoor show 2 years ago, but not last year, is the Girl Guides were there with cookies.
Oh,
So
good.
if you're a Girl Guide cookie person, no promises, because I don't know who's coming, but it might be your opportunity.
Okay, that's good to know as well.
So as Kate announced, if anybody has any questions, feel free to throw them in the post and or raise a virtual hand, and we'll go ahead and ask. The question I'll ask for you, Kate, is if somebody wanted to do a 1 week trip in Wabakimi, what sort of price range are people looking at?
Well, a great deal of the cost is getting there. I mean, are you thinking of the Caribou project itself, or of generally of paddling?
Just in general, if somebody wants to go paddling, you know, take a 1 week trip. And
well, I think it really depends on where you're going. You can easily spend a week on Crown land and in non-operating parks in Wabakimi. So if you're heading into the park, you're looking at pretty typical Ontario parks campsite fees for your group or for your nights. But it's also very easy to stay out of the park. And then if you manage to do that, then the main cost is getting there, both either driving and then working with an outfitter to shuttle your vehicle or shuttle you into the park somewhere. So it can be quite inexpensive, particularly if you're not spending all your time within the park and paying park fees.
And for people who haven't been there before, is it, easy to get maps and other documents that show what are the good routes and which ones maybe not so good?
Yeah, I would direct you to the Friends of Wabakimi website for that. That is the Friends of Wabakimi sort of came about initially as a mapping and route information organization. So they've been in it, we've been doing it for a long time, and there's huge amounts of information available. They do have a large planning map of the whole area if you want to, that's a nice way to spend your winter days, is looking at the planning map. And then there's specific route maps available for different areas. Of course, the Wabakimi Provincial Park does also have a map that has good route information, but it doesn't extend outside of the park itself. And of course, the routes continue on, and some can be done completely outside of the park. So I would suggest the FOW site, which I see you've put in the chat. Thank you for very good route information. Also, if anyone's interested in really looking for information, if you become a Friends of Wabakimi member, that gets you access to a lot of trip reports, and there's a panel of FOW members who provide guidance on trips. So if you have questions, there's someone there to kind of, if someone's done your route before, they're happy to answer questions about it. So it's a great resource for route information.
And then Marky would like to know, are there any tracking devices on the Caribou so they can be tracked by the Friends of Wabakimi?
Yeah, good question. We're not doing any particular tracking of individual animals. Mostly we're looking at habitat, identifying habitat that's being actively used by caribou right now. There has been tracking done by the MNR in the past. I don't know of anything actively happening right now, but I could be just unaware of that. Another piece of the work that we're going to be doing to get good population numbers, what is most often used is winter aerial surveys. It allows you to cover much more territory. It's also a lot easier to see them because you can see tracks. You can see the contrast of the animal against the snow as opposed to in the summer months. So we don't have funds for doing multiple years of aerial surveys. It's very, very expensive, but we do have funds for 1 year. So we're working with the MNR and Ontario Parks to get guidance on what is the most useful place to do kind of a one-off survey. Wabakimi Provincial Park does do an annual survey, flying the same route every year. And so that gives them kind of continual long-term data. And so we're working with the park naturalist to figure out kind of if we're going to add in one more survey, what's the best place to do that? How are we going to contribute the most useful information?
Again, if anybody has any questions, stick up your hand or stuff it in the chat. Otherwise, you're going to listen to me for a minute. So science is a really good thing, and sometimes it gets paid attention to and sometimes not. Have you any sense of the extent to which the powers that be are actually listening to what you have to say and, more importantly, acting on it?
Yeah, well, that's a tough one. And that is why I share the other organizations that are also doing other work because they're taking on a lot more of that advocacy work than we're able to do with this particular project. So we want to support, and we know that that work is really important as well. The reason that we got this funding and what the Caribou Conservation Stewardship Program is this agreement between the federal government and the provincial government. And in essence, what happened was the federal government told the province that that Ontario needed to step up and do more to meet their commitments under the Species at Risk Act, and more for protection of caribou. So we're hopeful that the federal government is paying attention and that this work, and we're one of 17 or 19, I can't remember, projects of various scopes and sizes and being taken, or that are undertaken by different organizations all across the province around caribou research in various ways. So we're hopeful that there are going to be positive outcomes. The forestry industry is changing as well. There's always things kind of that are moving and shifting, and while it's not always a priority, we're hopeful that it's something that there will be positive changes for in the coming years. It's also very difficult. I know I've spoken to scientists who say, you're not going to see a change in 3 years or 5 years. It's a long-term process, but protecting those critical habitats and creating large enough spaces and connected habitats, that's the thing that's going to make the difference. And so we just have to keep working on those things and hoping that we can make some progress in that sense.
Another question in chat: are there other animal predators for the caribou in the park area?
Yeah, I mean, wolves and bears are, I mean, probably more wolves, but both wolves and bears would be predators to caribou. I think the road building and the changing habitat that it brings moose in really does bring more of those predators nearby, but those would always be their threats, even when they're not being impacted by that changing habitat.
Mm-hmm. But what about the idea of using trail cams on the bedding areas, or is that something that could possibly discourage the caribou?
Yeah, good question. I don't know if it would discourage them, but I think it would just be tough to install them and have them there at the right time. You'd want to. It's not something that we're thinking about, and I haven't heard about it being done. But I think it would be just difficult to get them in the right place at the right time without potentially disturbing the caribou, the females, the cows, when they're kind of hunting for that perfect calving area. The calving beds, when we find them, are quite distinctive. You can't miss it, that's what's happened there. You sort of need a number of features to identify both having calf pellets, adult pellets, and the female antler shed all in that one place. That's going to tell you this was a calving bed. But the bedding areas that we saw were pretty obvious. It's just a matter of actually being on the ground and finding the location and kind of identifying that spot.
And any thoughts on how you feel about people who find discarded antlers, take them home as souvenirs?
Yeah, we ask that people leave them behind, just as a, let them contribute to the ecosystem again, admire it and have a good look at it, but let it contribute where it was dropped.
Any questions at all from either chat or raise a virtual hand, whichever you like? No? Well, with that, Kate, do you have any last comments? Anything you'd like to just emphasize as here's something to take away?
Yeah, I think just that we as paddlers really have so many places that we appreciate, and it doesn't need to be Wabakimi, it doesn't need to be Caribou specifically, but I think it's been nice for me to think about how to sort of contribute and what is a difference that I could make in the area that I love to paddle in. So that's been sort of a fun, nice takeaway, and I would encourage any paddler to think about that a little bit when you're out there and exploring different spots too.
Mm-hmm. And then I assume if somebody wanted to donate money, they could just find a donate me to me box on the link that's on the chat group.
There is on the FOW website, there is a place that you can donate if you wish to donate either to FOW or to the project specifically. You can ear tag a donation for that. Yes.
And then in case you're not seeing the chat, there's a thank you from Jane, who's going to see you in Toronto. And
great.
another one from Marky saying she enjoyed your presentation, particularly the videos, and more thank yous rolling in.
Great. Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming out. And please, if you're at any of the shows, Toronto or Ottawa, or we'll be at a couple in the States, please come say hello, and would be great to meet you.